The Senior Bowl is done, and that means free agency and the NFL Scouting Combine are the next two big events in the off-season calendar. Yeah, the Super Bowl's on Sunday, but the Vikings aren't playing, so we're not going to talk about it. But we are going to talk about what the Vikings are going to do with the off-season. We're also going to talk Myles Garrett. Does it make sense for the Vikings to make that trade? So we're going to get into all of that and more here on another episode of The Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of The Real Forno Show, sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. I'm your host, Tyler Forness, and with me, as always, is producer Dave in his spot up in the top left corner. Dave, it's good to be back. It is good to not have food poisoning anymore. My goodness, that was not a fun weekend for me, but we made it. We survived, and now it's time to talk more Vikings football. How are you?
I'm doing great, but everybody wants to know, because we discussed it Saturday on 2 Bloggers. Was it the seafood restaurant that gave you the food poisoning, or was it a Waffle House?
I think it was the half dozen oysters I ate. So here's the weird thing with food poisoning. And I say this having been ServSafe certified multiple times, and you learn about the cause of food poisoning. Basically, you can get it from as soon as 4 hours after eating something, or as late as 18 months. So something I would have eaten in July of 2023 could have given me that food poisoning. And that's the frustrating part, is you genuinely don't know. You think you know, and you think you can pinpoint it, but unless you get tested and kind of the medical team figures out what exactly it was, you don't know. And that's then, especially, getting calls as a restaurant manager, you have to tell people that. Be like, well, unless you can prove like, hey, I ate raw chicken from this establishment, or you get tested, I can't really help you. And that's not a fun conversation to have, but it's the reality of it. So I end up calling the restaurant, which I go every year. I love that place. And I'm like, hey, I'm 99% sure I got food poisoning from eating these oysters. I'm not mad. Letting you know just in case you hear anything else, because I would want to know that too, especially when you deal with a lot of seafood. It sucks. It was awful. I barely got to do half my Senior Bowl trip, but you can only control so much. And you know what? It is what it is. So I think it's going to be really...
You still went, and you still got all the rundowns daily with your compadres in the Airbnb. You talked to everybody.
Yep. Well, Dave, I spent about 36 straight hours in my bed. It was bad. But you know what? Life happens, and we're here. We're not going to complain. Even though I just spent a bunch of time complaining about it, I guess. But we're here. We're going to have some fun. And I think, Dave, we should kind of start here, because we're going to talk about the Senior Bowl stuff, kind of the things I learned. Odie, why are you looking at me? There are no more treats for you. You have to take your nap. It's showtime, honey. He saw me grab treats, and he's like, ooh, there are treats for doggy. Nope, they're gone.
Cause and Effect has a good first question. What did you take away from the last week's Senior Bowl from a personnel perspective, and from Vikings KOC/Beeflo/Quasi perspective? Side note, did you think of the Royal Rumble? What did you think of the Royal Rumble?
We'll get into all that, but I think we have to talk about the Myles Garrett stuff first. That's going to be an entire segment, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But I want to start with this Myles Garrett stuff, because every team should want to trade for Myles Garrett. He is a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer right now at the age of 29 years old. This is what prime Reggie White was in the 1990s. He's incredible. This is an incredible football player who still has 2 years left under contract and is the best defensive player in the National Football League. If Aaron Donald was still playing, you could still make an argument that it is Myles Garrett and not Aaron Donald. This is an incredible football player. So, of course, everybody's asking, well, should the Vikings end up trying to make a trade for him? And I think that is a very complicated answer. On the surface, the answer is yeah. You absolutely should trade for this guy. He's one of the best players in football. Imagine having him in a Brian Flores defense. He could
the
just
NASCAR package would be just absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, he could just rush a passer by himself. You don't need to do a lot. Just go. That sounds great. And then you can just put 3 guys on the other side and run all kinds of weird ass stunts and boom. Or you can just be like, hey, Grenard, Garrett, just go. Just run. Just go create havoc. There's different things you can do. But it's cost prohibitive, and that's one of the reasons why I think the Vikings will not make the trade. I think he immediately becomes the best player in your defense. You can make an argument that he is the best player on the team above Justin Jefferson, because that is how good Myles Garrett is. And that's not an insult to Justin Jefferson. They're both like top 5 players in the league. You can interchange those guys. And I think that's a very fair talking point. But it also one that really doesn't matter because they're both just really freaking good. But you have to talk about the cost prohibitiveness of acquiring him. So one, it's going to cost you at least 2 first-round picks. And by doing that, you're also inheriting $19.2 million in salary cap hit this year, $20 million next year. Northfius makes a comment that you couldn't afford it anyways. You can. It just makes everything else more difficult. And you have to be right and hit on a lot of other moves. And that is the kind of the snowball effect. You can't be wrong on your free agent signings. You can't be wrong on your 3rd and 5th round picks. You got to be right. You have to be right. And that puts your team and front office in an incredibly difficult position where you can't make mistakes. The way I look at it is this. If you can get him for a cheap price, which you will never do, I would consider it. An ESPN radio host, he calls himself Hembo. I can't remember how to pronounce his name. It's Paul H. Yeah, I think it's a Greek name, and Greek names like phonetically just mess me up. So Paul ended up talking about, well, who says no? Myles Garrett for JJ McCarthy. And I think that's an interesting idea. That is something you do only one if you are that sold on Sam Darnold, which right now I'm not. I don't think anybody in this chat is that sold on Sam Darnold. But if you are, or you have questions about JJ McCarthy, actually you probably need both. And you can use him to get Myles Garrett to make this defense a juggernaut. That's an intriguing option. Is it the best option? Is it a good option? That's going to be up to your own interpretation. It's relatively new. I just wrote about it for A to Z Sports. I don't really have a true opinion on that yet. I need to think about that. Because in order to be willing to trade JJ McCarthy to land somebody like Myles Garrett, I have to be sold on Sam Darnold. Because that's number one. Get quarterback right, everything else falls into place. Everything else is easier to put into place once you figure out who you want your quarterback to be. So if I'm 100% sold on Sam Darnold and I have questions about the long-term health of JJ McCarthy because of this knee, and you have not seen him play a regular season game yet, that could be an interesting move. I also want to preface this. There is a 99.999% chance that this does not happen. But I do find it interesting that that's kind of the route because, one, we've talked about Sam Darnold being used as trade bait because of this draft class being so poor. And the free agent class basically being Sam Darnold and then Daniel Jones. So who's going to kind of fortify that? Some people are trying to make Jackson Dart from Ole Miss a thing. Spoiler, no. I would not try to make Jackson Dart a thing. Not at all. I don't think he's any good. Had lots of discussions with... Oh, we have breaking news. This is an interesting one, Dave. Cooper Kupp just tweeted, and it was retweeted by Tom Pelissero, which is how I got it. I was informed that the team, meaning the Rams, will be seeking a trade immediately and will be working with me and my family to find the right place to continue competing for championships. I don't agree with the decision and always believed it was going to begin and end in LA. So, Cooper Kupp trade speculation. And I think that's really interesting. And I think it's very interesting for the Minnesota Vikings. But if you're going to make a trade, and I'll kind of wrap this up in one single bucket, Dave, then I want to hear your thoughts on this overall scope, because it's very interesting. And there's so many layers to it, which is why I'm leaving everything a little ambiguous. I'm not speaking as a matter of fact on any specific thing, because I have not made up my mind if I want to bring back Sam Darnold yet. I have not made up my mind if I want to roll with JJ McCarthy. I've not even made up my mind if I want to roll with McCarthy, but have a bridge guy. Like, I don't know for sure yet. That answer will come, and you will hear that from me before the beginning of free agency. If you're going to make a trade with the limited amount of resources that the Vikings have, you can't miss. This better end up with a title. You better be right. And if you are right, then it could result in the Super Bowl. That's the big thing for me. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has done a great job. Like, we could talk about the draft stuff all you want. I think Vikings fans have a skewed perception on what a draft hit is. And I think that is somewhat unfair to what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's draft picks have been for the Vikings. Because, like, if you look at it, Caleb Evans was a hit. You got a year of quality starting ability out of that guy. For a 4th round pick, that's a hit. Jalen Naylor is a capable wide receiver 3, which is a starter. That's a massive hit. Hits are relative. They are not always the same. And the fact that you missed on Lewis Cine, who completely cratered on everything that he was great at in college, which was identifying and exploding toward the ball. And then all of a sudden he just wasn't good at that in the NFL. And then you have Andrew Booth, who he just kept getting hurt. And both of them were hurt by the scheme change. So factoring in those things together, it's just inherently frustrating that there has not been more success. But the Vikings have not been void of hits. You could call Nick Muse a hit too, because he's a 7th round pick. But he played relatively well for you when he played. If you get any kind of good playing time out of a 7th round pick, that's a hit. You could consider Ed Ingram a hit because he gave you some quality starts over 3 years. That's going to be a little more controversial to me than the other 3. That, and your mileage is going to vary on that, and I don't even know if I consider him a hit, and I might be Ed Ingram's biggest believer on the internet. But draft hits are so different whenever they're, especially considering when they're picked. Jordan Addison might be the biggest hit. But when you use trades and you use those picks and you have limited assets, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has done great with trades. Yeah, we make fun of the Jalen Reagor trade, but the idea was good. The Ross Blacklock trade, the idea was good. They didn't work. They're upside trades. Sometimes, you know what? You make a move and you bust. That's okay. They traded Andrew Booth Jr. and got Nashawn Wright, who ended up being a practice squad special teams guy. Okay. That's a pretty even trade. Both guys are kind of bad football players. Cam Robinson trade, massive hit. Robinson may have floundered at the end of the year. Great trade. It leveled out that offensive line and balanced it out so they could make a playoff run. It didn't work long term, but it worked to get them 9 straight wins. And then the TJ Hawkinson trade, massive hit. I won't hear anything that TJ Hawkinson had a down year. If you would have extrapolated that over an entire season, TJ Hawkinson has 1,000 yards. Touchdowns are random. I don't care that he had none. They are random.
He had 1.
Oh, he did? Okay. Well, he had 1. It still doesn't matter. If he had 10, it wouldn't matter to me that he had like 1,
right.
10. None of that matters. It's how does the offense do? Because Teddy Bridgewater in his Pro Bowl season in 2015 threw 14. Well, guess who his running back was? Adrian Peterson. Like, this is why context always matters. So the Vikings, you're going to make a trade. Don't miss. You can't miss. Make sure it ends up in a Super Bowl. Dave, what do you think about all this?
Well, first off, Garrett, if we traded for Myles Garrett, and I don't see how we could do that without sending a quarterback that direction, unless we spend 25 and 26 first rounders or whatever, something stupid, that I thought today, and I talked to Darren earlier, B-Flow would just salivate at the NASCAR packages that he could build with Myles Garrett, Van Ginkel, and crew in there. Just, I would salivate at seeing that. And it would make that defense just a terror on that side. But the cost is cost prohibitive. Now, Van Ginkel turns 30 this year. Garrett's 29. Somebody suggested on Purple Daily, well, trade Van Ginkel. No. He's a long-term contract. He fits well. He did best season of his career. Now, you want to keep him. And these guys can play into their younger 30s.
Well, it's also worth mentioning that Van Ginkel only has 1 more year on his deal.
Right. So, and that's where we hope that the young kid from Alabama, Mr. Dallas Turner, steps up in his development in this offseason, which I suspect will happen because he'll have a complete offseason for the first time where he can work on his nutrition and his weightlifting and building up his body as he still grows because he is so young and he can continue with that. But no, if you could get Garrett, I would love to see it. He is by far, PFF had him top ranked in the last 4 out of 5 years. And last year was the 5th year. They had him number 2 for grades. He is by far the best defender in the NFL. It's just, he's that good. Now, do I think it's going to happen? Not to us. There's other teams I could see it more likely happening to. Atlanta, but they've got salary cap issues. They would love to have him. The one I fear is Detroit, because they could use him, next to opposite thereof Hutchinson. Move one of them over, whichever, if they both play the same side. I think would be great, and Detroit has the money to do that. But it's going to be interesting how that works out. Now, for Cooper Kupp, we've speculated before, Cooper Kupp, Minnesota would be a great landing spot for him, and he might just want to come here and be wide receiver 3 because he would be better than Naylor, more wise than Naylor, put it that way, than Naylor straight off the get-go. He's worked with Kevin O'Connell before. Now, if they're talking trade, what are you going to trade? We don't have hardly anything to trade with is the problem. So, and we got, as Northview says, a lot of holes to fill. So, we'll see. Now, just because Kupp wants to trade doesn't mean he's going to get one. He may get released, but we'll see how that goes. When a player says, I want traded,
No.
Garrett's going to get traded.
That Dave, the verbiage is important here.
The Rams.
The Rams said they're going to try and trade him, and they'll work with Kupp to pick the team. And that's a big thing for the Rams. They have always taken a lesser return for their players to make sure they go where they want. And there's a lot of bad things with that.
Yeah.
But they are very player friendly in that realm.
But they're also telling the league that we want to get rid of them.
Well, they didn't. Cooper did. But, I mean, everybody kind of saw the writing on the wall anyways, especially after Cooper Kupp's comments after the divisional round. He's due a $29 million salary cap hit with the Rams. $20 million in salary, none of it's guaranteed. If they cut him, it's only about a $7 million savings. It's $9+ million if they trade him. And I think that's an important angle here. So whoever gets him could just modify his contract and it wouldn't even be a problem. I think the Vikings might end up, if they wanted to, they could absolutely do that. And I'm sure Cooper Kupp is probably going to be willing to take some sort of pay cut just because, like.
And as far as trading JJ McCarthy, I think that's a no-go from the get-go. I think JJ McCarthy is the starter. He is going to be KOC's opus.
Probably. But I also think the idea of if you decide Darnold's the guy, McCarthy's never going to have more value than he does right now.
Well, and I don't believe. Yes, we're hearing tons of rumors, but Graziano was one that sort of poo-pooed that and said no. But tons of rumors that Sam Darnold is looking to return to Minnesota. Minnesota's likely to sign Sam Darnold, and I even did a spot on 2L Bloggers. Bookies.com has Minnesota ranked number 1 when it comes to odds to where Sam Darnold's going to end up. And I'm thinking, I bet this is just because we've got good team and good team ownership. This is just they're keeping up Sam's value or building it up so that he gets to go and get a good size contract, that they're taking care of the player that took care of them in 16 out of 17 out of 19 weeks during the season.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but melted down on the last 2 most important games of the season.
Yeah.
Is what I think's happening. I'm just a fan. Been talking about this team publicly for over 2.5 decades. What do I know? I mean, it's just my opinion.
Dave, you know nothing until you get bourbon in you. Are you drinking bourbon right now?
No, I'm drinking scotch.
Well, that's your problem. You got to go to
Monkey
bourbon.
shoulder.
Oh, monkey shoulder. That is a good daily.
Yes. I am very low on my bourbon, and we're drinking down our stocks here.
Fair enough. I should probably consider doing that. I have like 25 bottles and I don't drink at all. Maybe I should start. Maybe I should
do is have a friend over.
More like 12.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of booze in my basement. But I think to kind of wrap this up, I think McCarthy's going to end up being the guy next year. And I do believe that when you're talking about Darnold, I think one of the interesting things is you have to kind of look at it like a college course, his season. The first 16 games are still a big portion of his grade, probably like 65%. The final 2 is the end of term exam, the final. Worth 35% of your grade. So they're going to be weighed heavier because they're the biggest games. But the week before that Lions game, he torched the Packers. He lit them the hell up.
It was glorious.
In a game that they needed to win in order to have a win and you're in situation for the number 1 seed.
It was glorious, especially beating the Packers. Anytime we beat the Packers is wonderful, but he played exceptionally well.
And that's where the conversation gets murky. as fans, it's easy to look at the final 2 games and be like, you can't sign this guy. But it wasn't all his fault. I'd put 50 to 60% on it. I'm on record saying about 50 60% is on Darnold. It's a tough one. It's a very tough one. You know what isn't tough though, Dave? Going to play and have some fun with our friends at Underdog Fantasy. One of the cool things is the big game is this Sunday. You guys all know what the big game is. And Underdog is the place to play if you are a fan looking to cash in on all your favorite athletes' performances. Because it is the big game, there is going to be a plethora of different things that you can pick from over under. All you need to do is pick 2 to 8 and pick higher or lower. Place your bet, and you have a chance to win up to 1,000 times your money. I'm going to be making a bunch of picks, my picks for the big game, and we will have them on Wednesday's show. We will show those. But Underdog is also celebrating the big game by giving everyone a no sweat entry, which means you either cash it or get your entry fee back in bonus credit. So if you make a $25 bet and you lose, guess what? You get it back. So come join Underdog before the big game kicks off by signing up with the promo code FORNO to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit, and you get that free pick. Don't forget, Underdog is only available in the select states that you currently see on the screen. And if you do have a gambling problem, there are numbers that Dave will flash up here in just a second. Make sure that if you have that problem, you call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org, and they will help you. And Dave, our friends at Underdog have been great. You know what else is great? The Senior Bowl. I love the Senior Bowl. Even if the Oysters did not love me back. And there were some interesting things about the Senior Bowl, and we're not going to do like a super in-depth breakdown of the Senior Bowl, but I do think there were some interesting things that we can gather from the Senior Bowl that will impact the Vikings. It will impact them in a multitude of ways. I think the big thing with the Senior Bowl is it is really important in understanding and contextualizing tape. I put it at about 10 to 15% of the NFL draft process. So much of it comes behind the scenes that we don't know. We don't know. Because they do interviews, there's all kinds of stuff behind the scenes. And I think that's an important aspect here. But the on-field stuff, you use it to contextualize the fact that, hey, you do this on film, and now I see you do it in an all-star setting when you played at Toledo, like Darius Alexander, the defensive lineman. Okay. I feel a lot more confident that tape is now going to translate, because not only did I see you dominating the MAC, but now you're beating the poop out of these SEC offensive linemen. Those things matter. And that's why you have to contextualize it. And you have to understand, okay, is this move going to win reps in the National Football League, or is this a TikTok route that we saw the wide receivers running all week with like 2.5 second releases? Or if you did a 2.5 second release, Pat Surtain's just going to punch you, and you're just going to be on the ground because they're just going to be like, I'm not dealing with this. I'm just going to press you, and the rep's over. So understanding the difference, understanding how it translates, and also knowing that the film is still king. This is just to contextualize what you see on film, and there is something to seeing these guys in person.
Well, Gray Zabel is a prime example.
Yeah, I love Gray Zabel. I think he might have been the best player in Mobile. His performance was incredible. He went from like a top 50-ish kind of player to this dude probably goes in round one. It's still going to take a team that wants to take a guy who's probably going to be a guard or center in round one. But that dude was mauling guys. He was displacing. Great hands, great anchor. He was doing everything. And you know what? He just looked like a 6'5" dude from Fargo, North Dakota that had a beer gut because he drinks too much Busch Light. But it didn't matter because once he got in the trenches, he was like an Iowa farm boy. So there are a lot of things from the Senior Bowl that you can kind of gather. And one of the things that I think is really important is the cornerbacks were really good. The defensive line was really good. The linebackers were shockingly good, and so were the running backs. And I think by seeing some of these things, you can then project forward. And by using those projections forward, Dave, it can help you create a path of least resistance, a path of, we call it in pro wrestling, the path of glory. When WrestleMania comes around, there is what's called WrestleMania weekend, where a bunch of independent promotions will put on shows leading up to WrestleMania. The people that I do stuff with, the Voice of Wrestling, they don't go to WrestleMania. You know what they do? They fly in for the independent shows and then they fly home. So there's what's called the path of glory because there's usually multiple shows at the same time. What's your best path to seeing the best wrestling? What's the best path here for the Vikings to end up with the best offseason? And by attacking things in free agency that are stronger than the draft, that's probably your best route. So I think we learned some things there. I think we learned that there are some receivers in this class that could be really intriguing. Jack Besh, he got a lot of press, unfortunate press, because his brother Tiger died a hero in the terrorist attack on New Orleans on New Year's Day. He caught the game-winning touchdown in the Senior Bowl game with 0 seconds left. 7 seconds left on the clock when the play started. He was wearing number 7, his dad's number, his brother's number. But he plays like Puka Nacua. Stylistically, size, physicality, all those things. It's very similar to Puka. That's going to be a very valuable player, especially in a Kevin O'Connell type offense. I think there's some other receivers that the Vikings will be interested in. I also think there's a lot of defensive linemen that the Vikings will be interested in. I heard some rumblings that a guy like Walter Nolan might not even be on the Vikings' radar because there's some interesting things that I've heard outside of the scope of everything, off the field stuff, character concerns.
Well, supposedly he was. Now I listened to this on Vikings, Locked On Vikings this afternoon. It's been reported he doesn't like football and doesn't want to play. And now he's refuting that and saying, wrong, I love football.
Hey, all I can tell you is by watching that guy play football, he's real good. And that dude is good at football.
And that could be, you got to always look at who's reporting it and why. Where's the source coming from? Is there advantage to say, oh, he just doesn't like football? He's got problems. You don't want him. Is that coming from a team that wants him to drop into their lap? Pre-draft talk? Now, the refuting obviously comes from him and his people.
Mm-hmm.
But there are rumors that go out there like that.
And he's probably got a good agent, which he should have. Always get a good agent. And I hope that the intel I have was incorrect. But that's the intel I got. And there are a lot of things that can change. Interviews here, interviews at the combine, more digging into the player can change your opinion. And it should if you learn more information. You should always be willing to evolve your opinion with new information.
Mm-hmm.
I also heard that there's interest in Iowa running back Caleb Johnson, which
we talked about Saturday.
Yeah, I know he's an interesting player. Dane Brugler in his first mock draft sent him to the Vikings, and when a guy like that does something like that, can usually put 2 and 2 together. I know there's some interest in some of the wide receivers down there in like a day 3 range. This team seems to be they're just doing their due diligence, and that's a good thing. They should be doing their due diligence. And I'm really excited to kind of see what that ends up looking like, how they end up like maneuvering around the board in the National Football League. Because it's fascinating. It's fascinating to kind of see what they end up doing. It's fascinating to see how they end up trying to build this thing out. There are a lot of interesting players in a lot of interesting positions. And just when you look at my mock draft tracker over the course of the first 5 weeks, we have 112 mock drafts. The top 5 players, 3 cornerbacks, 2 defensive tackles. That's kind of what you're looking at right now. But we also have a whopping 32 different players already. Last year, we had 35. Now, things changed quite a bit towards the end of that process with the 2 picks, and one of them was almost guaranteed a quarterback. But it's worth noting, 2 years ago, we had way more players selected. 54 different players were sent to the Minnesota Vikings at 23rd overall. The top 2 were Deonte Banks and Jordan Addison. So there's some interesting data to kind of look at with this mock draft tracker, which is why I do it. I think it's interesting to see how the trends, how they form, how players are being viewed throughout the process, and where they were and weren't sent to the Minnesota Vikings. It'll be interesting to kind of see how they end up formulating things. But as of right now, like the Senior Bowl, a lot of interesting things, a lot of really interesting elements in play.
I enjoyed watching them practice and watched the clips of the game, missed the game because I was prepping for 2 bloggers. But I saw the highlights. Arroyo, the tight end, looked absolutely great. He'd be a nice addition, but we're not going to get a tight end. There's just all sorts of things. I'm just curious, because Kwesi takes players, and usually the Senior Bowl and the Shrine are your day 3 picks for a lot of them. Yeah, there's the handful that go up higher, but there's usually the day 3 picks and the undrafted free agents. And I'm curious which one of those sparked Kwesi in the coach's eyes down there and said, he may not go in the draft, but we want to keep in contact with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of those guys
hitting on those UDFAs. Mm-hmm.
I had an argument with somebody in my mentions the other day, which I really shouldn't do. But if they're wrong and they're telling me I'm wrong, I'm going to tell them. Undrafted free agency is part of the draft.
It is.
And if you hit on undrafted free agents, you hit on something in the draft, and that's important. One of the things that I think is a common misconception with undrafted free agency, which is a whole part of this whole conversation about the Vikings offseason, is if you are an undrafted free agent, that does not mean that the team that signed you did not like you. The Vikings liked Ivan Pace Jr. a lot. They just liked the guys that they drafted higher on their board. And that's why Pace wasn't drafted. Not because they didn't want him. And I think that is something that gets overlooked. Oh my gosh, I can't believe they took Jay Ward in the 4th round and not Ivan Pace Jr. Well, you can argue that, hey, maybe they shouldn't have had Jay Ward ranked higher. But if you're taking a guy that's ranked like much lower on your board, like your process is flawed. The results were better, but your process is flawed. And I think that process of
evaluating availability.
Yeah,
Jay Ward had to be grabbed in the 4th versus they could wait on Pace.
Well, to a point, but that's also hindsight is 2020. That's also one of the reasons why they took Lewis Cine at 32 instead of waiting, because they did not want to miss out on him, because everybody was talking that he was going to go at 33 to the Bucks. But you take the guy who's ranked higher on your board. You don't mess with that. And I think that those factors matter when you're talking about UDFAs. I think this Vikings offseason, Dave, is probably one of the more fascinating in recent memory, even more fascinating than last year, especially because of how this team just kind of grew and evolved and became something else over the course of the year. I'm really intrigued to kind of see what that looks like. I'm intrigued to see how this thing grows. And I'll answer this from cause and effect, and I think we're going to kind of end the show here. Who's your Ivan Pace Jr., Adam Thielen, Everson Griffin in this draft? I think what cause and effect is meaning is who's my sleeper. And it's hard for me to truly give you a full-on answer with that question until I do like a super deep dive. But I'll give you a name that I really like. And I don't know if he's ever going to be more than like a wide receiver 3 and just a core special teamer for a decade. His name's Kymir DK from the University of Florida. He's a wide receiver, transferred in from Wisconsin, only played the 1 year with the Gators. But he's just a solid guy that you want to have on the roster. And I think he could be something with the Vikings. And how Kevin O'Connell likes to run all these inbreakers, and he likes guys who block. Stylistically, he's not Puka, but he kind of has those like same aura elements where he's going to do the dirty work. He's not going to be the best athlete, but he's going to do all those little things that matter. And I think a guy like that in the right system could have a 10 to 15 year career. Kymir DK, University of Florida wide receiver. That's the guy I would keep an eye on as far as being a sleeper. That, Dave, that's going to be your show tonight. A lot of interesting things, a lot of trade talk, surprisingly. I would expect the Vikings to make one trade this offseason. I would always expect them to make a trade, just because they're the Vikings. It's what they do. But how they go about it is going to be interesting to keep an eye on. North Face, I don't want to hear it. Yeah, it's a Florida Gator, deal with it. I don't care.
I was waiting on that.
We will be back on Wednesday. Just a heads up, the week of the combine, I will be in Mexico for the majority of it. I think I've told you this, Dave.
I know you were going to Mexico. I didn't realize it was the week of the combine. The
21st through the 27th. But so when I get back, we'll be able to do some combine stuff, because
we usually do the combine we do the draft live. Never mind.
The practices start on Thursday afternoon, and then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. By the way, Dave, the big roundabellies have Sunday all to themselves.
Yeah, baby.
I know. I thought you'd appreciate that. So I'll be taking a little bit of a break. Dave and I will probably have one episode, hoping we can maybe record it before then. We've had that idea before, and I haven't been able to kind of get my own schedule figured out because life is just chaos around here lately. Not in a bad way, just it's busy. It happens. So there will be a little bit of a break there, but we're going to have a lot of great stuff for you. There's going to be even more coming from a draft perspective. We're going to have conversations. We're going to probably have an extra show here coming up, and we're going to have a lot of fun. It's the best time of year. And don't forget, this Saturday show of Tool Bloggers is the last Saturday show until the season starts. So the week after the Super Bowl, it's on Sundays.
Yep.
This is why you want to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Ring the bell so you know when we're going live and when we're going to have some stuff. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll be back on Wednesday. I'm Tyler.
That's Sal tomorrow night.
Oh, that is tomorrow night? Okay. Sal tomorrow night. And I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching The Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!